No one knows the exact origins of the song We Shall Overcome, but it might have been born in the 19th century, during the time of slavery in the United States. Its opening and closing lines are reminiscent of an old African American spiritual, No More Auction Block for Me. Imagine enslaved people working in the fields singing something like this simple refrain.
No more auction block for me, no more, no more, no more auction block for me, many thousand gone.
In 1901, an African-American Methodist minister named Charles Albert Tindley published I'll Overcome Someday, a hymn about spiritual warfare, not civil rights.
The world is one great battlefield with forces all arrayed. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday.
In the late 1940s, Lucille Simmons led several hundred black women who were courageously picketing the tobacco plant where they worked. They were trying to raise their hourly wage to 65 cents. Lucille began singing this song, slowly and freely, encouraging her sisters to fight to overcome their oppression.
We will win our rights. We will win our rights.
We will win our rights someday.
Zilphia Horton, a teacher at Tennessee's Highlander Folk School, learned the chant from the striking cigar factory workers, and she passed it along to Pete Seeger, who published it in 1947. He changed the word will to shall, perhaps because shall has a more open vowel, and he added more verses. Seeger's folk music colleagues, Guy Carawan and Frank Hamilton, changed the rhythm to a slow 12/8 tempo.
We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday.
In 1957, deputies broke into a classroom at Highlander Folk School, where they were teaching union and civil rights training. They cut the power and forced the students to lie in the dark as they smashed up the classrooms looking for communist literature. The trembling students on the floor began singing,
We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
One of the students was a 13-year-old girl named Jamila Jones. In order to control her fear, she made up a new verse to the song, which the students sang for 2 hours until the men left their school and left them alone.
We are not afraid today.
In the 1960s, a young black quartet called the Freedom Singers carried the tune and the hopeful words with them as they traveled around the United States, singing for peace and freedom.
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome someday.
black college students sang as they were hauled away from whites-only lunch counters and thrown into police wagons.
We shall overcome.
In 1963, mourners sang the song as four little girls were pulled from the wreckage of their Sunday school room after a bomb went off at their church in Birmingham.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
In a huge rally in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, calling for the end of racism. At that event, Joan Baez led 250,000 of Dr. King's supporters in song.
We are not afraid today.
And on April 9th, 1968, in Atlanta, Georgia, a massive crowd of black people and white people linked their arms and sang, "We shall overcome," while marching behind Dr. Martin Luther King's funeral procession.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
And today, a century since its birth, "We Shall Overcome" is still being sung. It brings people together, it stirs people to action, and it provides strength to continue fighting for the rights of the oppressed everywhere. The song's even made its way around the world. It's been belted out by striking coal miners in Great Britain, by apartheid opponents in South Africa, and by student protesters in China's Tiananmen Square. And just in the last few years, it was sung at a Baltimore vigil for a transgender woman who was brutally beaten. Children of immigrants sang "We Shall Overcome" at a Capital Dream Act rally. And it was sung countless times at Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. Now please join us as we sing together "We Shall Overcome" to remember and honor all of those who have sung this song before us.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall